No little boy ever dreamt of being a railway porter when he grew up. After all, where's the glamour and excitement in carrying things around for other people? But freight trains did carry Britain's things around for 100 years or more, and the engines that pulled and pushed and shunted up and down, to and fro, were the real strength of the railway system, the ones that got things done. I'm afraid there isn't much nostalgia for steam goods trains, and people didn't even notice them much at the time. They just trundled slowly past, holding up the express that you wanted to get on. And yet, from 1850 onwards, freight trains always made more money than passenger trains.
Now, the whole trouble with a pickup goods train is that it's great for the community, but it's a big headache for the railway. What a railway really likes is a long goods train full of just one thing, coal or oil or cars, which goes straight from its starting point to its destination without stopping to pick up the farmer's chickens. And this was the way freight was going more and more into vast bulk. But the vaster and bulkier the trains got, the harder they were to pull. The quick, cheap and easy solution was to get two engines on the front. But this was a false economy because although two trains are twice as expensive, they are not twice as efficient. And also apparently there was a temptation for many drivers to assume that the other engine was doing most of the work, and if they both thought that, well, there were problems. No, the most sensible, if expensive solution was to build much bigger and much stronger engines. And this engine behind me, a Class 9, is the biggest and strongest that British Rail ever built for freight. One of the nice things about working on a film like this is that very occasionally, you do get to drive in the cab yourself, so...
Today we're pulling, rather ironically, a load of stone. The stone used to build roads and help the railway's great rival, the motor vehicle. British Rail's other great contribution to the steam era, of course, was to kill its stone dead. And these 9Fs were scrapped in the 1960s with almost indecent haste. This was one of only 5 to be preserved. I can see why people thought this was British Rail's finest contribution to the steam age. The feeling of power and strength is immense. Just coming up to its 100th birthday, this 060 tender engine was designed to haul heavy, frequent loads over the industrial centre of England. Before the 060 could go out earning money for the Great Western Railway shareholders, it had to be fed and watered. So much coal was dug out of our mines that in 1900 the French put round a malicious rumour that Britain was about to become buoyant and float away. But it's hard for us to imagine what quantities of coal were eaten up in the steam age, which should perhaps have been called the coal age. Coal fed British industry from ironworks to Royal Navy destroyers, from engines in Penzance to shipyards in Glasgow. The freight of many railway lines was over 50% coal. For 100 years, the standard British workhorse looked almost exactly like this. 3 pairs of driving wheels to spread the axle load, and none of the wheels very big, not good for speed, but good for traction, and a large tender for all that coal and water they got through. Meanwhile, there's the job of putting the train together. It's beneath the dignity of the big engine to do work like this. Mile for mile, the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway once earned more money from freight than any other line in Britain. I wonder if they ever worked out what proportion of freight running time was spent going up and down goods yards. I bet they were too scared to find out how long they took getting nowhere. "40 years later, and we're on, yes, the same old standard British workhorse. This one was built for the Southern Railway. It's still an 060, the boiler's bigger, but technically the engine isn't much different. A steam buff might say it didn't need to be much different, but really it was a case of technological inertia. The rest of the world was building much bigger engines, even experimenting with diesels. But we British steamed on blithely as before. Our mixed goods trains never moved at much more than a leisurely 20 or 30 miles an hour, for safety reasons. They didn't have enough stopping power to go any faster, because only the engine and the guard's van were equipped with brakes. What the railways wanted was for all the trucks to have brakes as well, linked to the engine. Technically, they could have done it, but half the trucks on the average train belonged to private owners, everyone from coal companies to Coleman's Mustard, and they simply didn't want to invest the money in conversion. I grew up next door to the Great Western Railway, and I can still remember the clanking of goods trains through the night, the lonely whistle, the echoing of empty wagons. It never occurred to me till now that night time was the right time for goods trains. With nothing else around, no passengers, they could get down to business. By night they flourished unseen, and unseen the mixed goods train died and vanished from British life. Although I didn't know it at the time, shunting engines were a doomed species. When other competition arose, they would survive only in steam zoos and railway safari parks. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If the goods train can't take you, the lorry must. It's hard to explain the fascination of steam and speed. Why do hundreds of people pay good money to get onto a steam express, which they know, by law, can't go any faster than 60 miles an hour? Is it something to do with the fact that a steam engine at 60 seems to be going as fast as anything else at 100? Perhaps it's some powerful folk memory of the sound and smell of steam. Any one of the hundreds of experts travelling this train could probably tell you, just by listening with their eyes closed, how the engine and driver are doing, and even why the wheels are slipping. Not that many of them will have their eyes closed on a day like this, even in a tunnel. This A4 Pacific is the ultimate in steam glamour. Its sister engine, Mallard, took the world speed record for steam in 1938 and never lost it. But there's a lot more to speed than just breaking records. It's also big business, a case of getting a coachload of paying passengers from A to B faster than your rival company, as any engine designer would tell you. Yet even so, fast engines have always had an air of elegance and glamour. When Patrick Stirling built his famous single-wheeler No.1 for the Great Northern Railway, he was after power and speed, but he somehow made it look very good as well. This was one of the crack express engines of the 1870s. If you'd lived between London and York 100 years ago, this is the intercity special you'd have seen steaming past at anything up to 80 miles an hour. Hauled by engines like this, the London to Edinburgh train took about 9 hours, which beat the old stagecoach record by a good day or two. And yet, in a funny sort of way, they still treated the engines like horses. At Grantham, the locomotive would be led off for food and water, and a fresh one put between the shafts. At York, the same again, until the 400-mile haul to the north was over. Today, No.1's on a rare day out from York Museum, but it still spins along like a well-oiled sewing machine, only slightly dwarfed by its complement of modern coaches. From time to time, the railway companies indulged in bouts of racing to the north. In 1895, Patrick Stirling himself sent out a message to his staff. The London and North Western Railway Company have expressed their intention to reach Aberdeen before us. This, of course, we cannot permit. But Stirling died only a few months later, probably knowing in his heart of hearts that his famous engines, once model of the year, were already last year's fashion. The new look came from a quarter which had been out of the headlines for a while, the Great Western Railway of Brunel and broad gauge fame, with the green and gold charisma which made it the best-loved company to those who loved it, and inspired more resentment among others than any railway company had a right to expect. In the early 1900s, the company set a standard in speed for years to come. Their new locomotive designer, George Churchward, in his first year in office, built an engine which was the first ever to do 100 miles an hour, even though news of the world record was kept secret for 15 years. The city of Truro was a hybrid design with a much more effective new boiler set on a frame and chassis borrowed from his predecessor. In fact, Churchwood had designed the revolutionary boiler while his old boss was still in office. Before 1900, the speed of trains had risen from 5 miles an hour to about 100. In this century, steam engines were never to get that much faster. What they did was to get bigger, thicker and more powerful. The castle was built 30 years after the city of Truro and still has the same look. What's different is that it's been through a bodybuilding course and can pull much longer, heavier trains. This is Castle pulling out. It was from Cheltenham that for a long while the Great Western had the world's fastest scheduled service, Cheltenham Flyer. Over the home stretch from Swindon to Paddington, the start-to-stop average was 71 miles an hour. According to the book, on a good day the train would touch about 90. Quite why so many people wanted to fly out of Cheltenham as fast as that was never really properly explained. But the publicity was well worth it to the GWR, and they flew a camera up especially to record it. Then the initiative for speed was snatched back by the East Coast route to the north, where Nigel Gresley's Pacific designs were emerging as the fastest ever. It was hard to prove this in the 1920s, when running times to Edinburgh had not changed for 40 years, but in the 1930s the race to the north was on again. The LMS held the top speed record of 114 miles an hour in early 1938, but this was broken that year by the most famous of all A4s, Mallard. A kill-trap double blast pipe arrangement may seem a bit technical to you and me, well, to me anyway, but it did the trick. 10 miles an hour faster than locomotives without it, and more to the point, cheaper on fuel and easier to fire. The golden age of steam really came to an end with the war, and things were never quite the same again. Some people would say that the age of steam should have ended earlier. After all, other parts of Europe had already made the commitment to diesel and electric power in the 1930s. The A4s were perhaps not so much world champions as a glorious sunset, or the last of a line of kings. And yet, the extraordinary thing is that while thousands can tell you which steam engine broke the world record and when, I've yet to meet anyone who can tell me with confidence what the diesel or electric rail speed record is today. image of Mallard and the A-Falls lives on. The further the age of steam and speed recedes from our anonymous age, the more potent become its sights and its sounds. People's folk memories go back to the Edwardian turn of the century days, when summers were always hot. People always went on their holidays to Devon and Cornwall, and the Great Western was the only way to get there. Indeed, it was the GWR who dreamt up the phrase Cornish Riviera. The magic of that steam highway to the west is such that people are still celebrating the GWR 40 years after it ceased trading. And today, they're preparing a special excursion drawn by 2 veteran locos. The Great Western had a great penchant for naming its engines after manors, halls and castles in its region, and people sometimes said that the Great Western, aiming at a rich class of passenger, might be attracting them by putting their addresses on the engines. But the whole point of opening up the West was to get everyone down there on their holidays, and the GWR pretty soon started looking for a mass market. But what is it that brings everyone out today? Is it the music of steam that they remember from their youth, as if they were getting out their old 78s? Is it the imperial trappings of deep green uniform and shining metal that attracts them, like the cavalry riding past on parade? Or is it even, as I think it is in my case, the feeling that these old engines were great actors in a lost tradition, filling the stage with gestures and noise and sound effects, making modern diesels look as if they're performing in their sleep? With a couple of steam engines in fine fettle, you can recapture the feeling of the days early this century when a fast express to the west was, for most people, the ultimate in holiday travel. The package flight of pre-war days, flying down to our very own British Riviera. So this is where most of the enthusiasts gather with their video cameras. Engines make the most steam and smoke going uphill, you see, and that always looks best in the home movie. Railway people are still amazingly loyal to the line they grew up with, so when we enlisted railway historian Peter Simmons, we first had to find out secretly where he started life. Deep in GWR territory in Cornwall, thank goodness. You can't help getting the impression the Great Western Railway is actually rather different from other railways. I mean, I grew up by the side of the Great Western, so I feel rather pro it, but I've met people who feel a bit anti it, as if it was sort of the biggest and the best, but no one likes to admit it. Was it like this always from the beginning?
It was certainly one of the biggest in 1923, one of the top five when they formed the other four groups, the LMS, the LNER and Southern. And it got nicknamed, I mean, sometimes it was called the Great Way Round, GWR, sometimes it was referred to as God's Wonderful Railway, and other times it was gone with regret after nationalisation, of course.
One thing I know, because you told me, is that the GWR were very good at sort of improving their lines. I mean, actually sort of doing new lines. I mean, this used to be an old GWR line.
That's right, yes, this went out of use, nearly 100 years ago, because they built a straighter line with less bridges, but viaducts, but a tunnel about a mile up that way. And this was part of the job of improving the railway down to Cornwall. They cut out the old way round via Bristol in 1906. They quadrupled to deal with the summer Saturday services. They quadrupled through Taunton in the 30s, through Bristol, and many, many improvements of that sort.
And this was all to improve the great holiday trade that
yes.
they were either serving or creating. I still can't make out which it was. Steam trains now look part of the traditional British landscape, but many people once found them noisy, dirty, nasty and modern, in fact. Round the corner, the line runs for nearly 5 miles alongside the sea, as near to the water as it can get without getting its feet wet. Indeed, in Victorian times, when carriages were less waterproof than they are now, waves often came over the seawall into the coaches, and it was quite common for passengers to have to stand on the seats just to keep dry. This preserved steam railway is one of the last relics of the steam holiday kingdom of the Great Western Railway. Within these 7 miles there are enough viaducts and valleys, woods and hills, seaside scenes and river estuaries to make it seem a microcosm of the old Great Western. And like the old Great Western in its golden days, it actually makes a profit as well. So in this corner remains a small piece of the golden age of steam, a holiday scene preserved in suntan oil and engine grease. Odd to think that the Great Western created the idea of holidays in the West Country. Now it's the holiday people who are keeping alive this memory of the Great Western Railway, as once it was. There are more steam engines to be seen now on British rail lines than there have been for 20 years. Of them all, I think the most romantic is the Duchess of Hamilton. What is not so well known is that 30 years ago, I was the proud owner of the Duchess of Hamilton. She was 9 inches long, weighed well over a pound, and kept falling off at the corners. Now at last I've come face to face with the real Duchess, who weighs over 100 tons in her stocking feet and pulls 500 tons with a full train. It was worth waiting for. The Duchess lives at York in the National Railway Museum, but she sallies forth regularly to haul special trains over long distances. And for this she has to be prepared and fired up the day before by Pete the fireman and Kim the engineer. I spent 5 years of my youth sitting beside a railway line collecting train numbers, hardly ever going home. It's what they call a misspent youth. I shouldn't have been collecting numbers. I should have been finding out how engines actually work. Well, it's never too late to learn. So, really, Kim, we're sitting under a huge boiler which is mounted on huge wheels. What I want to know is, how does the steam get to the wheel?
Well, the boiler, which is all that red mass, is full of water. And at the top, there's what we call the dome. And in there, there's the regulator valve or throttle valve. Steam then comes from that regulator valve through into the smoke box, which is this black mass at the front here. And that's then what we call superheated, which is the steam is then taken in tubes back through the fire tubes and heated even more to a higher temperature. This engine, when that's working hard, can get up to about 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. And then that came from the superheater and it comes down to the cylinders. And this particular locomotive's got 4 cylinders. There's one on either side and two hidden between the frames. This part here is the valve that lets the steam be admitted to one or the other side of the pistons, because this is a double acting engine, not like a car engine that's double acting. The piston is actually pulled and pushed, and this valve up here controls which side of the piston that steam's got to go.
All the power is in there?
The power is all in the cylinders, yes.
And just that little cylinder pushes this thing?
Well, this and 3 other cylinders here. It's then transmitted through this crosshead, because that piston wouldn't be strong. It would bend if it hadn't got support from these bars, and then down to the connecting rod, into a rotary motion, down onto the crank, which is incorporated in the wheel. This is one that's actually driven by the cylinders. The other one is the leading one.
And that's
driven
by the inside cylinder?
That's driven by the inside cylinders.
See, and that's connected along...
That's connected by a side rod, which connects all 6 driving wheels together so that you've got better adhesion.
And it really makes a difference?
That makes a lot of difference, yeah. If you had a single wheel, you wouldn't get half that.
Before the war, the London Midland Scottish Railway was lagging badly behind the other lines, with nothing nearly as powerful on their express routes as the Great Western Kings, so they tempted William Stanier, the wizard designer of the Great Western, to come over to them and create something fast and sleek. By 1938, he had come up with the goods, the Princess and Duchess classes. And it was in that year that the Duchess of Hamilton was born, at Crewe. What I'd never realised was just how full of steam a steam engine really is. Smoke may come out of the chimney, but everything else is steam, with no electricity to help at all. If you want sand on the line to help the wheels grip, you blow it out by steam. If you want more water in the boiler, you blow it in by steam. The Duchess has steam pipes the way we have blood vessels. Cut her, she bleeds steam. Well, I think I understand how it all works now, except for one thing. How do you actually start it?
Right, well, we'll show you, because we're now going to move off the shed in any case, so... You have to turn this handle on, that creates a brake. So as you can get the brakes off. Right. It's the first thing you have to make sure of. You can stop before you move. That's got to come around at 21 inches of mercury. We test it. We then take the engine tender handbrake off. Then we move this lever to whichever direction we want to go. In this case, backwards. Then pull this lever and that will move.
Magic, so it does.
We've gone far enough, this one stops it.
So, have you got anything more to do before the run tomorrow?
No, we're all ready for tomorrow now.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, because it means I have to get off.
Right, bye.
If anyone can be called a duchess's best friend, it's Kim, who accompanies her everywhere with an oily rag, like a butler with a napkin. Nobody knows quite how powerful the Duchess is, because they've never been able to shovel coal in fast enough to get her up to full power. It's not the train which reaches 100% output, it's the firemen. Even 2 firemen wouldn't be enough. I know that it won't be half so grand or aristocratic or breathtaking as the train we've been on today. It won't even smell half as good. The next day, I'll have forgotten all about my electric ride to London. But once you've been over the top with the Duchess of Hamilton, the memory stays with you forever.